So, good afternoon for everybody that's joined us in Ashurst, Melbourne. Good afternoon to everybody that's joined us remotely across Asia Pacific. Many in there is also morning for those that are dialed in internationally, and as well as for those that will listen to this recording afterwards. Welcome, and for giving Reveal the opportunity to share the exciting things that are happening within Reveal Asia Pacific, and especially over the last 12 months. Before I kick off, I'd like to kind of acknowledge the country if I could. So we acknowledge First Nations peoples as the traditional custodians on the land on which we work in Australia. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to the youth who are working towards a brighter tomorrow. Again, good afternoon and thank you for turning up. This is the second, what I'll call user group community series since we kicked off this event back in May. And it's an exciting part for Reveal, not just globally, but also within Australia. Not only have we got many firms that are on the journey with Reveal globally, but also Reveal here locally within Australia. But I'd also like to say, as part of putting together this user group, I'd like to put a big thank you to Crystal and Phil and the Ashurst leadership team for allowing us to host the event here today. So a big thank you to those. So just quick introductions, if I could, on who will be presenting this afternoon. Most people know myself. If they don't, Simon Barnier. I run Reveal for Asia Pacific. And joining me this afternoon for presenting is George Sosha. Many of you either linked into George or know George over many years. George's background, 16 odd years as a lawyer partner. George was also one of the co-founders of the EDRM model, and up until two years ago joined Reveal as our brand ambassador. And part of being the brand ambassador is not only attending events such as these, but also a close alignment to our development team. Joining me as well is Enzo Lasciotto, very famously well known, not just within Australia, but Asia-Pac, worked within law firms, but in the last 12 months was really the first employee for Reveal in the Asia-Pac region. So thank you, Enzo. As well, Phil Smith, for those that know Phil, Head of E-Discovery at Ashurst for the last couple of years. Prior to joining Reveal, sorry, not Reveal, you could have.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yes. Thank you. Prior to, I let that out of the bag. Prior to joining Ashurst, welcome, Phil. Prior to joining Ashurst, sorry, was many of his lifetime at FTI, and finally Andrew Malarkey, partner at Court Menthar, and Andrew's been also almost a lifetime, 10 plus years at Court Menthar as well. So looking at today, what's today about? Today for me is about introducing Reveal 11 and the formal launch. As a lot of you have been on the Reveal journey, we acquired many technologies from Mind's Eye from a processing perspective a few years ago. Then we made the acquisition of NextLP. That gave us the foundation from an AI perspective that allowed us to build AI across our complete e-discovery and investigation suite. Then merged with BrainSpace early last year. But fundamentally what we've done since early last year, we have rebuilt Reveal from the ground up using the best of technology from Mind's Eye, NextLP and BrainSpace, and that is what we'll be showing you today from a single pane of glass unified platform. And the exciting part of today is not just are we launching it within Asia Pac, we're launching it globally, so across the US, across EMEA, and to fundamentally change our business from where we had 3 individual tools to now the single pane of glass platform, and rolling that out globally is a big lift and a big congratulations to Reveal globally. And the exciting part, as I touched on, is it's not just about launching Reveal 11, is not only have we had foundation partners that came on board in the early days with Reveal within the Asia Pacific region from a global perspective. But over the last several months, since Enzo and myself have come on board, we've got many service providers, law firms, and legal service providers that have also come on board. So for me, about the future of Reveal is extremely promising, and I believe we've got something that we'll be showing you today that is a differentiator in the market. So looking at the agenda, if I could, and before I kind of hand over to Enzo, George is going to take you through AI from an investigation and an e-discovery lens. George and I spent last week in New Zealand with Lawfest New Zealand, went through a similar breakfast where we went through a similar presentation, thought leadership piece, and it's great to have George as part of being able to deliver that thought leadership piece this afternoon. We'll then hear from Enzo that will take us through not only Reveal 11, but also the soon-to-be released streams. So you would have seen the press release on streams, and streams for us is around our multi-platform, multi-disciplined, being able to bring in multiple formats of short messaging into our platform. We'll then hand over to Phil. Phil will take you through his journey with Reveal, even in the short period over the last 6 months, and what they're doing and what they plan to do. And rounding up the presentation will be Andrew Malarkey on the quarter method journey. So before I hand over to George, for those that are new to Reveal or for those that will be listening to the recording afterwards, for me, it's about 3 things. First thing is around providing the full end-to-end from processing through to production and having that in a single pane of glass unified platform, and having the foundation of AI across all phases of that e-discovery and investigation lifecycle. But more importantly for us, and I believe a differentiator in the market, is not only are we delivering this across SaaS and launching it in our SaaS within this region, but also being able to deliver this via on-premise for those organisations that are important to them to have it on-premise, but also delivering it via a hybrid model as well. So with that, a big thank you again for turning up, and over to George Sosha, and enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. What I'd like to focus on in the next 13 minutes, is something that Simon has mentioned several times here, which is AI and the use of AI, and go through a little bit of the history, talk about the present, and maybe even touch on some future here, at least in the legal space. AI has been around a long time, since the 1950s, at least conceptually, hit the legal, or at least investigation and loss and technology litigation market around 2005, 2006, 2007, brought to us via what initially was called predictive coding, then got renamed TAR because of some copyright or trademark and copyright issues. There are various flavors of it. That form of AI is a form of supervised machine learning. We've got machine learning, supervised and unsupervised. It's a form of a supervised machine learning, which I don't know how many of you here are familiar with and have used SuperCal. Okay, most of you folks online, I got no idea, so I'll touch on it quickly. The basic idea is you look at a document or a file, really, and you say either I like it or I don't like it for a specific purpose. The machine then takes that information back, looks at all the remaining documents, prioritizes them, pushing to the front of the list the ones it thinks you are going to like as a result of that one. That's the basic idea. By and large, that continues to be the state of using AI in e-discovery technology. There have been some exceptions, but not a lot. There are a number of other directions one can go. There is sentiment analysis. There is transcription, AI-driven transcription of data. There's translation of data. There are a host of other capabilities. One of them is what I've got up on the screen now, which is image analysis, or rather it's image recognition and then labeling. You can start with any picture, any sort of photograph. There are different technologies for this, but they mostly operate on the same basis. It starts out as a form of supervised machine learning, but by the time it reaches us for our uses, it is an unsupervised machine learning. It starts out as supervised machine learning. The system we have here is built on AWS's recognition system. As I understand it, they have trained their system on something like 1.3 billion pictures, more than any of us in all the matters combined are ever going to have the opportunity to train any system on. As a result, it can do a very good job of going through content and trying or pictures and trying to identify the content in the pictures. It could, for example, come up with anything from what we've got here, where it starts with a picture that is a mock-up of an ID, and then from there identifies content within that picture and a confidence level, how certain it is or how confident it is that that content is what it thinks it is. So in this case, it's 100% confident that there is text in this picture. 99% confident that this is document, and 99% confident that's an ID card. You can see here, if you look closely, the bar slides down, there are others below. In the testing I've done, I've got as many as 20, 25 different labels back with confidence levels running anywhere from 100 to 65. One of the ways I tested this, and you can go to our website and go to the blog post that I wrote about it, is back in January, I ran across a blog post that a researcher had done in 2017. She had looked at she'd run across a meme, and the meme was 16 pictures. For each picture, is this a chihuahua or is this a blueberry muffin? She broke that meme into 16 different images and ran it through 5 different platforms. I saw that and I thought, well, let's see what happens with Reveal. So I took it, ran it through our system. 8 of the 8 chihuahuas, it got us chihuahuas. 7 out of the 8 blueberry muffins, it got right. The one it got wrong, if you had just put that picture in front of me, I would have sworn it was a chocolate chip cookie. I would never have figured out it was a blueberry muffin. So it did at least as well as I would have done. At the end of her blog post, she listed 4 other memes. I went out, found those, broke those into pieces, ran those through our platform, and got varying level of results. The worst were at the bottom when it had to try to figure out whether these were pictures of sheepdogs or mops. The system didn't know mops from anything. It got 0 out of 8 on mop. But then I thought, okay, first, well, the system failed. We're not doing so well. But then I stepped back and thought, well, wait a minute. That's not how we approach problems in the world of e-discovery. We don't just try once, and if we don't get what we're looking for, stop. In something like this, we take one of 2 broad approaches. We do a sort of a concentric circle approach. Well, if I'm looking, I'll do the dog side. If I'm looking for a sheepdog and it doesn't find sheepdogs, well, I'll expand my scope. I'm looking for a dog. If it doesn't find dogs, I'll look for mammals. Or we do sort of overlapping areas. Then I cheated a bit. I look at what it had done, and it had identified those mop pictures as containing yarn or containing rope or things like that. Well, that's a couple steps away. That's more like what we would do. So I moved out 1 rung from the center, looked at and did it again. And at that point, it was 8 out of 8 on mops, even though it was 0 out of 8 on mop in particular. That's the type of capability we have now. Your chances of having to figure out whether something is a sheepdog or a mop, I think are zero. But there are many, many other uses that you can put that capability to. These types of capabilities, the AI-driven transcription, translation, image analysis, sentiment analysis, a host of others, are capabilities that are now available in our market. They aren't yet widely used, but they are available in our platform as well, of course, but available now. And I think offer a whole new set of capabilities and opportunities for us as we work with content that, because of these, now becomes usable for our purposes instead of content that we would typically just have to set aside and say, sorry, no good, not going to work so well. And that takes me almost to the end of my time. Questions? Anybody here or online?
So we've got a few minutes before we move on to info. Yep, 6 minutes. So any questions, I suppose, of one, George's experience globally in terms of what he's seeing in the market, or anything that he's gone through here. And please, for those that are on the phone or on the video con, please either type in a message on your chat if you'd like to ask a question, or kind of yell out. There's a quiet one. Just one question starts.
Yes.
I'll kick it off.
Yes.
Does it do any image clustering in terms of similar images?
So in terms of its own analysis of similar images, the way you would do it right now, with how we've got it implemented, is that you could then go into the search side of things and say, I want to find, for example, anything where it's got, I'm looking for let's say I'm looking for something with handwriting in it. I might look for handwriting, I might look for signature, I might see what else is related to that. Check off those boxes, figure out what confidence level I want. If I'm hoping to get lucky, I'll put it in a 95% confidence level. And if I don't think I'm likely to get something, I'll put it at maybe a 65% confidence level, and I can keep changing those. So it's not a visual clustering, but it is telling it to search for this and this and this. Another approach would be that you can, when you're in here where it says label name up here, but you can start typing in there and it will bring up answers to you. So that's one approach. What I've asked our data science team to explore, they haven't had a chance yet to pursue this, is taking these labels, which are very short, and using a capability that we have in the current Reveal 10, have not yet moved over to Reveal 11, called high precision classification, that works with short sets of messages, and see how well that will work for active learning. That would, if that works, that would get closer to what you're asking about. The other thing we could try, and I haven't tried this yet either, is working with those labels and our concept search capabilities. In theory, that should work. I haven't tried it yet, but if that works, that would bring back some data that you'll see how to make use of once Enzo comes up here. Other questions? Yes.
Are there any plans to implement form recognition? What I mean by that is I'm not sure what the AWS name for it is, but in Azure, there's a form recognition API, which would take that data and basically extract the text and put it into a structure. So it would be name, Dela Cruz, date of birth.
Right, and I now remember I'm supposed to repeat the question. So are there any plans to add in form recognition? So going through a form where you fill out information and recognizing different portions. I don't recall off the top of my head what sort of capabilities are available to us through the various tool sets we use. But now that you've asked the question, that goes into our list of things to take a look at, because John, who's listening in, is going to take a note for me and make sure I take that back to the product team.
And when you made, Andrew, when you made reference about forms, I know that.
Can you just stand up so just so the audience sees
You
you?
made reference to forms. I know that a lot of clients also made reference about being able to extract content from PDF files. So where PDF file has an image, where obviously being able to OCR the document, we're able to OCR over 120 different languages, but using a PDF file that has an image to do the image labeling as opposed to just running it on PNG or JPEG files.
So that then is a step toward what you were talking about, because that's getting the content, but it isn't associating the content necessarily with the location in the form, which I think is part of what
Yes.
you've got.
Yes.
You've got a form where typically it's always the same content at the same location. You want to grab that content, know that that content goes with that location, and then be able to bring that over and dump those into defined fields so that you can search on that content that way. And since we're recording this, and since John is taking notes, we'll be looking into how to accomplish that.
One more question, before we move on. We're good.
All
Thank you,
good?
George.
Okay.
Just So today I'm presenting Reveal 11. As Simon alluded to earlier, we've redesigned and redeveloped Reveal 11 from the ground up, bringing in the best of the functionalities around review, brain space analytics, and AI. What you can see on the screen is obviously it's an Enron data set where we've got 1 million records. When users log on, again, based on permissions, you can actually enable what a user can actually see and the functionality that can be also accomplished within the platform. When we look at a dashboard gives a user a associated metrics or visualization against the data that's either been processed, put in the platform, or data that's been loaded through a load file. So looking at the dashboard here, we've got these interactive widgets. Again, regarding the timeline, we've got the candy bar again, which is when you're looking at the timeline in the candy bar, these would have been derived out of brain space. So being able to identify the number of originals, near duplicates, and exact duplicates. When I make reference about exact duplicates, this is looking at the item at an individual level, as opposed to when documents are being processed and pushed into review, we deduplicate at a family level. Moving down the bottom here, being able to provide the visualization about the different document types, the number of records that's been processed and loaded against a custodian name. But what's more crucial and where we actually drive the innovation is around our AI technology. So what we have down the bottom here is our predictive scoring. And as George alluded to earlier, when we look at our traditional CAL, so we've got a model around responsiveness. That is your traditional CAL. So the thumbs up for positive, thumbs down for negative. We have over 20 AI models. And in this project here, what we've done is just layered in some of our AI models. You can either lay a model in as a singular model, or you can lay on one model on top of another, which we call pack and stack, to be quite granular of what you want that model to surface. So when we're looking at these models here, without running any searches, without running any analytics, upon overlaying these models, it's automatically able to detect, based on the relevant score rate, what that model has identified in this data set. And if I look at this model around gifts and entertainment kickbacks, clicking on that high position, I'll automatically go down to 9,500 records.
Enzo, before you do,
Yep.
and just a question came from the audience on the webinar is, are you able to amend the dashboard with different widgets and pivot tables?
So at current, the widgets that are available is static, but through our development lifecycle, we will also provide the ability to for users to create their own widgets, either against work product or against metadata. So at present, what you see, the widgets that are available, they're currently static, but as I made reference, future development and future releases will then enable users to create their own customized widgets.
So one of the actions we'll provide out of this is part of like the roadmap as well. And so based on that question that came from Evan, in terms of when you can modify those widgets, we'll let everybody know. And then please, any other questions that people have, either please interrupt Enzo, because we do want to make this interactive. We've got a half an hour, and those on the phone, please just keep sending the messages.
Enzo, quick question. If say for I forgot to load one of the models in and I wanted to just add it in after the data had been processed, I can do that, right? And it just recategorizes on the in the back end. Is that right?
Can you restate the question just for the audience? Yep.
So the question is, with regards to the models, can I load a model after the data's been loaded into the platform? And the answer is yes. So although we've overlaid these models here, at any point in time, if there's, again, these 30 models that our data scientist team have developed, users also can create their own models. So throughout the course of that project, either utilizing our models that have been designed and developed by a data scientist team to bring surface information that you can then further enhance, or using your own models, you can actually enable those models at any point in time, whether it's at the beginning, whether it's at the middle, or whether it's at the end, if you want to do some quality control against any work product that's been done by the legal team or the investigative team.
So one more question, which you know you hate me.
Yeah.
And are we able to export the graphs?
Yeah. So the question is, are you able to export the graphs? Yes, you are able to export the graphs. So we've exported the graphs, either export them to an Excel file or to an image file or to a different file format as well. So throughout the progress of the project, being able to go into those graphs, export those information, provide it to the legal team or provide it to the client. Okay. As I go through, if I click on the grid view is the way that documents are presented in a document list. Again, a lot of investigation and legal teams are quite familiar with the grid view, the document list. So from the document list, obviously we've got a number of different actions that can be applied. One of those actions simply could be clicking on the sign and batching these out to the first level review, or batching these out to either first level review team, second level review team, or a specialist team. While I'm in the grid view, I'm just going to exit out of this this search, and I'm going to do a search for Raptor. And again, those that are familiar with Enron knows that Raptor is one of the keywords that was identified in Raptor. When we run a search, we can either use our traditional keyword, or what we can do now is use our discovery concept searching. So again, when we're looking at the concepts, this is derived out of BrainSpace. I ran a search for Raptor, and what it's done, it's identified the top 10 concepts that have a high conceptual relationship to that of Raptor. So when you're running your traditional keywords, either applying the keywords in here also gives you the ability to identify other concepts that may resonate to the type of legal matter or investigative matter that you're dealing with, where the client or the legal team may not have thought of that term or that phrase being identified. When we're looking at these concepts here, we also now have the ability to change the weight. Changing the weight will also determine how that concept is going to return based on the data that's been identified. So in this sort of scenario, if I click on required, I've now changed that to a conceptual term to a keyword term. Not only that, if I click on this little icon here, it now provides an easy visualization of what search is going to be run to return that data set. What we also do is we also identify the top 11 and 100 additional concepts. So again, being able to go through here, bringing in any of these additional concepts that might resonate to your legal matter and bringing that as part of your search scope. One of the new features is Brain Explorer.
Before you move to Brain Explorer, sorry, my friend, question. Will R11 have threading that shows the most inclusive thread in review or in the grid?
With that question, the answer is yes. As we progressively release enhancement features, one of the enhancement features that was derived out of BrainSpace is the ability to identify the most inclusive thread. And as we release that functionality will then be inclusive as part of the platform. So although at the moment the threading isn't currently available, as I made reference, progressively pushing that feature enhancements, that function will actually be, I think it's pushed out by the end of this month or the end of next month.
Yeah, so just to kind of clarify Enzo's point, is what was available in BrainSpace, all those features, or yes, there were some features between NextLP and BrainSpace that are coming together, the best of, around that threading feature, it will come in over the next 60 days, 30, 60 days into the Reveal 11.
Thank you. So what I've got here is Brain Explorer. And the way that I represent Brain Explorer, it's finding the unknown within the known. So I ran a search for Raptor, and it's identified the top 10 concepts that has a conceptual relationship to Raptor. But what I've done is I clicked on Merlin credit as being a keyword. If I click on Merlin credit now, I've changed the node to 5. If I click on Merlin credit now, 1 second, what it's actually presenting, it's now presenting the top 5 conceptual concepts that have a close conceptual relationship to that of Merlin credit. So again, further going through here, I can then do some further analysis. And if, again, selecting this concept here, now I'm actually bringing back the top 5 concepts that have a conceptual relationship to this concept here. If by chance I've got these additional concepts on the right-hand side, let's say for this scenario, I'm going to bring in Heartland Warrants as part of my scope. And as part of my scope, I'm now going to click on Heartland Warrants. And in Heartland Warrants, it's now going to identify the top 5 concepts that have a high conceptual relationship to that of Heartland Warrants. Further from here, if I go in and let's say, for example, I click on this, click on that one there, now identifies the top 5. Again, I can further drill in deeper to identify additional concepts. And let's say, for example, click on that one there to identify the top 5. If any of these concepts resonates to the type of legal matter, similar to before, I can right click, I can change the weight, I can also exclude it to make sure that that concept isn't being brought back. I can add it, I can also show the path, showing the path that details where that concept resides and how that concept has a conceptual relationship to the one in question. And if any of these concepts, as I made reference, relate to the type of project, I can now simply grab that, drag it in, make that part of my scope. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to change that as a required. Changing that as a required and going into my concept query, I can see now that both Merlin credit and Chuka SLP is actually a end statement. So again, running that, what that actually means is I'm running a search against all these different concepts or keywords, but the documents are going to be returned has to have both Merlin credit and Chuka SLP as part of the associated item. Clicking on that, clicking on search, being able to click on preview.
Can I just bring one thing up, if you don't mind?
Yep.
And it's just a question that was raised in the audience, and the question was, are we retiring BrainSpace? And the answer is categorically no. So what Reveal will be delivering is Reveal SaaS of what you're seeing here, but also on-premise as well as hybrid. And BrainSpace is continuing to be improved as Reveal 11 is. And we will continue to provide BrainSpace to other review platforms that it is done today. And more importantly, BrainSpace will continue to have functionality improvements that you're seeing in Reveal 11. We will continue to develop BrainSpace at the same time.
So thanks, Simon. So from this search here, we can actually run some additional, add some additional criteria. I can now bring in the associated model score. So that model and bringing back a model where the document has been scored between 80 to 100. But what we also have is term lists. And when I click on term lists, I've got a set of terms that I've got here. Let me just copy and paste that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove that scope first. 1 second. So in here, we've got some search, some terms. And what we've also done at Reveal is created our own query language, which is called RQL. And obviously RQL means Reveal Query Language. But what that allows us to do, the RQL allows us to not only run keywords and again, based on the different Boolean operators, but now we can also search against keywords, but also against metadata values as well. And in here, we've got a metadata value around the master date, in addition to the relevant keywords. What we can now do is, if I go into my table view, I can now click on this to identify the number of documents that are going to be returned against that data set. If I click on monitor, and I know that monitor, in this example, is going to bring back a large amount of documents, I can now add my scope criteria, clicking on that, brings back the relevant document set. I can run that to identify all the different documents as in addition to the number of family members. Now that I add that as part of my search, clicking on preview, It's then going to bring me back, let's say 60 documents, run that search. Now I've got those documents in my grid. Similar to before, I can click on assign, batch those documents out to the review team. I'll just pause in case, yep.
With the AI models, can you overlay the AI models on top of the clusters or the brain thing that you have? Can you overlay and see what sort of models are sitting on top of each of those groupings of documents?
So the question,
Do you want to?
yeah. So the question is, with regards to those clusters, or sorry, the concepts, can you overlay AI models to identify which concepts have been scored really, really high against that AI model?
Models, yeah.
Yeah. So at the moment, being able to select an AI model, then going into that concept, then brings back the identity of what concepts is actually scored against that AI model. So in BrainSpace had the ability to create like a focus group. So a focus group being able to isolate documents based on a specific focus, being able to accomplish that sort of criteria. So focusing on an AI model and then using the concepts to identify what concepts have resonated against that focus group.
Gone to the reverse though.
So doing the reverse is layering you want to layer the AI model on top of the concept. AJ, what we'll do?
Or when if we're not sure, we can.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, I was about to say.
Okay.
We'll take that on board and then come back with a more accurate answer. So let's say now I'm going to close out of this, and what I'm going to do is click on clusters. While this actually builds, so clusters is based on the BrainSpace cluster rule, and what you can actually see is what we're doing in clusters is bringing back documents that have a contextual relationship as opposed to a conceptual relationship that I showed you before. And what I mean by that is back in the day, hard copy documents, you had a box. In that box, you had documents that related to IT, related to finance, related to legal. In that legal folder, you then broke that legal folder from corporate, litigation, and IT. It might be hardware and software. This is how we are currently facilitating this against the data set. So if we look at this data set here, and I click on this cluster set here, you got 350,000. So a lot of clients are using clusters to identify data that is affiliated in their project. And what we have here is these documents all have these cluster terms. But what we have is these break-off cluster sets. So these break-off cluster sets has a contextual relationship to this broader data set, but where we're actually refining that data set even further. So using this cluster set here, being able to go from a broader cluster set to a narrow cluster set, for example, to even going further down. So let's say, for example, I've identified these 4,100 documents as part of my scope criteria. I can simply go into here, I can add it to my search, and then based on added to my search, being able to batch those documents out to the review team. But what we can also do, if I move further out, knowing that some of these documents in this data set have also been coded, I'm going to bring back a document set where documents have been coded against responsive. So I'll run that search. Now it's going to bring back 11 documents. So what it's actually doing now, it's highlighting the cluster set where those documents are affiliated, where those responsive documents are affiliated to that cluster criteria. And if I go down here, you can see anything that's resonated in white means that there is a singular document that is affiliated to that cluster set where that document is responsive. What we can actually do even further is if this document on the right-hand side is a document of interest, selecting this icon here will then tell me where this document sits in my population. So now I can click on that document there. And what it's actually doing, what this is actually showing me now is I can now go from a singular document scope that might be a hot document or key document, in this case here, a document that's been coded as responsive, knowing that where this line overlaps all these different cluster sets means that these cluster sets has a contextual relationship to that singular document that you flagged. So I can simply go into here, and if I just move this wheel down, you can see that the line resonates. From here, I can then add this to my search, again, batch these documents out, knowing that there's a contextual relationship to that singular document that's been flagged as responsive. Yep. Let me just close out of that for a second, just go back in my grid view. What we've done is we've also identified some key documents. of interest. When I bring up these key documents, what I'm actually presenting now is our document viewer. Once this loads, yeah, I think. So when this document viewer comes in, obviously we've got our metadata field, we've got our viewer. One thing to also note is we recently enabled the ability to support the Australian numbering. So Australian numbering, although in this project here, there is no Australian numbering, but we do have the ability to support not only Australian numbering, but also allocate both a native document and a PDF document to a singular record in the platform. What I want to show here is our coding panel. So in our coding panel here, you can enable any tag to be stipulated as an AI model. And what we have in this panel here, we have 5 AI models. I've got a model around responsiveness, similar to what I showed you in the AI model against positive and negative. But we also got a model around each one of these issues. So enabling, if you've got 15 issues affiliated to your project, you can enable each issue to be categorized as its own AI model. You may also want to set up an AI model around privilege or privilege basis, knowing that you can actually enable any tag or any criteria in your coding panel to be affiliated to a model. But what this also allows you to do as an administrator, obviously this document's been selected as being 65, but as an administrator, you can hide the score rate from being visible to the end users because you don't want the score rate to influence the way they look at a document to the way they code a document. If I go to the next document, as we have our own processing engine, our processing engine is able to identify the top 3 languages within a singular document. And I'll wait for this to load. So if I scroll down the bottom here, you can see that this document, 61% English, 37% Japanese. If I scroll down the bottom here, you can see there's a lot of English content. We have the ability through our platform to translate over 100 different languages from one language to another. And if I click on the translated version here, you can see the translated version in English. If I then navigate to the next document, again, I believe it's the same image that George represented. So I'll just skim over that. One thing that I will say is one of our clients in the US used our image labeling solution to identify inappropriate material for an internal investigation. But not only that, you can also use it to identify logos, again, to mitigate any logos or any irrelevant images from being part of your review set. I'll then navigate to the next document, and I'm just going to minimize that. We have the ability to transcribe audio to text. Not only transcribe audio to text, but transcribe audio within a video to text. So here we have a deposition out of the US. And obviously from here, I can then go to a specific portion of that video. So again, if you've got an hour-long audio and only 30 minutes of speech, being able to use that auto scroll or the extracted text to filter on that data set. One of our clients also used it to transcribe a Japanese audio files to Japanese, then used the translation to translate the extracted Japanese content from Japanese to English, all within a singular platform. Yeah.
Are you able to redact using this as well?
Currently, we don't able to redact. So the question is, can you redact? Currently, we are unable to redact, but a lot of the clients that we've engaged have requested the ability to be able to redact the audio file as well. And again, part of that scenario, we've also put it through to our development team as a feature enhancement.
And so, sorry, this is the translation. Can you bulk translate and keep that in the system?
Sorry,
translation.
Yeah.
Can you bulk translate and keep that in the system to use with text searching and everything else?
So the question is, can you bulk translate? Yes, you can bulk translate. So being able to identify, because we're able to identify the top 3 languages, you can actually do a search for, let's say, Japanese. Bring back all Japanese that are, let's say, for example, has a textual output of 30% and above. Then select all those, output it. So you can actually output the extracted text into its own text set. So you can actually have a Japanese extracted translated text set. You might have a Korean. So again, being able to create your own text sets against the different languages that you're able to, not only that, but able to search against that text set as well.
Thank you.
When I go to the next document here, what I'm actually presenting is the current method in which we support short messaging. So we support short messaging in this sort of scenario. Everything is collated onto a singular document. In here, you can see there is the associated timeline. I've got 4 messages, 1 attachment. If I go to the next document, it's actually going to bring back the image. The reason why I want to show this is when I focus around streams is going to present the new technology or the new visualization in the way that we are going to support short messaging within review.
So before we do that, I've got 2 questions if I could.
Yep.
And maybe George, you can take the first one. So the first one from the audience is, this is all great, and my apologies for my back. This is all great from an investigation point of view. E-discovery needs to be methodical and verifiable. It is often in responding to a set of objective and subjective criteria. How do you verify the result of a review using this kind of process? I suppose the reason I'm asking you the question is more from kind of your experience of how this is being used from law firms, kind of globally, US, etc., from an e-discovery perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an e-discovery perspective, there are several components to how you verify the results. And part of it is, who are you up against in terms of your opposition? Because that's always going to flavor the approach you take. One of the things you can do is, if you are using concept searching in here, you can use what I think of as a hedge technology. Go ahead and do some keyword searches. See what the results look like there. There's a tried and true method that you can continue to use here, which is, once you've got, if you're using any of these tools to come up with a set of documents you think are responsive, you take a look at what's left. We've got tools built in for sampling and testing and evaluating that, but you can construct your own methodologies for looking at a sample of the results. And I know people talk about doing a controlled random sample, but I think often what works much better is a non-random sample. Go look for specific things to see if they got through when they shouldn't have got through, and search for those. So much of it, though, in terms of defensibility, is not a question of what the platform's actually doing, but a question of the lawyering involved and how well the lawyer manages to convey to the other side or the court the actual efficacy of the strategies used, the tool used, the workflows used, the strategies used, and the people who do the work and how they did that work.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, and then you've got 6 minutes, yeah?
Yeah.
So then the last question from one of the audience was, when is translation available in APAC? So currently, as Enzo's touched on, translation, transcription, we're using the AWS services. Transcription is there today. Translation, AWS are delivering it to us within late November, early December. So, I mean, we're working with them weekly. That's the time frame they've provided to us, Doug, in terms of from early this week, but we're on it in terms of weekly with them.
And just before I move into streams, one thing I just want to point off is AI-driven batches. And the reason why I want to focus on AI-driven batches, here we have our classifiers, and these classifiers were those AI tags that were set up in the coding panel. And if I click on responsiveness, and obviously I've got my tagging profile, being able to create AI-driven batches, and what that actually means is, when we look at this data set, again, this data set, we've got just under 1 million records. What we're doing is putting those documents horizontally. And what we're doing is, when we batch these documents out, and let's say we batch 100 documents out, what we do is get a high percentage of documents that are scored really, really high, and a small percentage of documents that are scored really, really low, and we're actually bringing that into the batch. And the reason why we bring in negative documents is we want to make that model as efficient as possible by bringing negative documents as part of the document review. Because if you always bring in positive documents, yes, yes, you're coding documents that are positive, but you're actually not really making that model really efficient by not bringing in negative documents as part of your document review set. And as I go from here, I'm just going to go back into the PowerPoint slide. Just going into here. All right, let me just click on it here. All right, so soon to be released. When I made reference about streams, obviously, a lot of clients these days are dealing with short messaging, whether they're Slack, whether they're Teams, whether they're SMS. what we're doing is presenting what we classify as streams. So there's two visualizations in streams. What we have is the wheel and spokes, and the next one is the layering. So in this scenario here, what we have is a data set where we've layered our AI models, and based on the AI models, you can see that against this project here, and this project was a real life investigation in the US. It was to do with a whistleblower making reference that an individual was getting shares of stock options based on a specific deal. So in this sort of scenario, we overlaid the data set using these models here, and based on these culling criteria, gifts and entertainment kickbacks was the one that actually surfaced really, really high. If I then go into the next screen, what we have now is layers, and what I've done is I've layered in the different communication types. So we've got Slack, emails, and SMS. I then layered in the relevant individuals, and in these individuals, the whistleblower made reference that John Thatcher was the person of interest that was doing some wrongdoings in regards to a pay-to-play scheme. Nick Toscani, again, these names are fictitious. So Nick Toscani was John Thatcher's boss. Russell Edward was a member of the team. And if we look at these communications and also this data set, these are what this is the type of scenario that investigators have to deal with. You know, having to deal with filtering on the data set and you know, trying to cull data from 480,000 records. So in this sort of scenario, being able to not only layer this information, but also being able to filter on the documents based on what George made reference about emotional and sentiment analysis. So when we layered in an emotional and sentiment analysis around opportunity, it then filtered the documents down or filtered the data set down, where we were able to identify that Russell Edwards dropped off as part of the communication, but Nick Toscani and John Thatcher was quite prominent. In that sort of scenario, SMS and Slack was quite prominent, but emails then fell off the relevant communication map. So using that emotional and sentiment analysis, we were able to be quite granular of what information we wanted to return. And upon bringing back that information, what we now have is our new viewer. So when we're looking at identifying and presenting short messaging, what we're now doing at the moment is, in this scenario, we've got this communication over a 5-day period, obviously 14 messages. Clients, users have the ability to identify the relevant date range. But what we're doing now is we're breaking each one of those items as part of those short messages as individual records. And if you look at this, the documentation, John Hatcher is communicating to Nick Toscani, said, "What's in it for us?" Nico Toscani said, "Options and a percentage in the company." Then it drops down the bottom here, and John Hatcher goes, "What are they actually thinking?" Asking for 2 to 3% in options. So again, this is the new viewer that's going to come into play. But this is also how we're looking at presenting short messaging within our future release of Reveal 11, but also streams. And I'll just pause there in case anyone's got any questions or comments.
Sorry, just in terms of how that would be, I suppose, exchanged with the other parties in a discovery, is that the ticked items would be the ones produced, or would it be
so that it becomes much easier to deal with just the situation you talked about. Yes.
Slow that up there. If I did want to just produce the ones ticked, would I presently be able to, understanding this isn't rolled out yet,
Yeah.
but is that possible as it
The
currently
question
stands in this update?
if you did want to produce just the ones ticked, with what we were planning to roll out based on this, would you be able to do that? And the answer, I believe, is yes.
Yes, yeah. And there's obviously, there's a number of different options. Yes, you can produce just those items that have been flagged, but we also have this little eye up the top here. And with this eye up the top, you can also stipulate that anything that's not tagged, to auto redact. So you can actually produce all 14 items, but only the items that have been selected are the items that are going to be visually represented in the output. So again, or provide those documents as singular records. So again, at the moment, it's at early stage, but as George made reference, we're actually going back to our clients and saying to the clients, how would you want to produce this data set? And from that, we're then going to develop different protocols and different outputs that meets our clients' needs.
Cool.
And from there,
Excellent, Enzo.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, Doug has asked us a question. Doug, we'll come to your question at the end, just so we can move on to Phil from Ashurst.
Just the PowerPoint presentation? Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. So yeah, my name's Phil Smith. I'm the head of e-discovery in APAC for Ashurst. Thank you for everyone to come and see lovely new offices, which haven't had a lot of use in the last few years. So it's nice. And thanks for spending your Friday afternoon with us. I know everyone is probably very excited to be talking about e-discovery on a Friday. But I just wanted to kind of touch on our journey for taking on Reveal, where it started, and sort of why we've chosen Reveal and how we've currently started to use it. To take I guess a little bit of a step back. So we're part of the e-discovery team is part of Ashurst Advance. We're our own stream within the division within the firm. It involves a number of pillars within that, including advanced delivery, digital, legal ops, flexible resourcing. But all that tied in together really does sort of like a legal service managed offering. But I guess the important part about that is that we've gone through a journey now. We're about 200 people strong in Australia and in the UK. And a big part of why we chose to sort of partner with Reveal and work with Reveal is sort of that future growth and that future development. Where we've started our journey really with Reveal as it is it ties into the question that someone made before, is that it's fantastic for investigations. And that's exactly where we're taking the first step with Reveal, is using it as our light touch primary investigation tool. So around 12 months ago, when we started talking with our employment, our competition teams and many other sort of members within the firm, we're kind of getting a lot of feedback from the clients in our current tool sets and in areas where we may want to sort of grow those tool sets and how we could use certain tools. So what we found out through those processes, having our conversations with our end clients and having a conversation within the practice group as well, is that there's a significant demand for cost savings for this light touch investigation, or what we're calling light touch investigation. So that actually has been amplified, as you could imagine, within the last sort of 6 to 12 months, where our end clients have less money to spend on this light touch investigation. They don't have, and when I guess I say light touch, what it means is just limiting the amount of actual doc review that is involved in this process. So from that process, we found that basically they want to, and it's a restrictor really as well for doing these light touch investigations, where they might actually not go through with it and rely on interviews and rely on their other internal investigations work. What we also found is that technology, of course, as you know, that's why the reason why everyone is here, is a necessity when analysing communication. And that's becoming ever more prevalent, and looking at things like streams is kind of the future of how you need to analyse communications. So it's finding things like channel hopping, when people are going from their email saying, hey, I'll give you a call, or they're going into text messaging. So sort of jumping through those types of communication, but not necessarily just who's talking to whom, but what are they talking about? What's that kind of information about at a really high level? Not going through having to go through the sampling review and you know, kicking off a CAL review, but what does that kind of look like? And the other one is that what we found from our clients, what resonated a lot was when we gave them data-driven information. So we gave them statistics, it's graphical information. It's actually something that represents itself in a report to the client of our findings that isn't just a long sort of document that's got legal opinion, but it's backed by this additional layer of information. So they want to be able to quickly surmise that information. So there's, of course, the factual information that's helpful, but it's actually that representation. So things like that channel communication, who's been talking to who, when was the uplift in that communication, is kind of the stuff that we were getting demands from our practice group, really a lot in that type of reporting back to our end clients. So how does Reveal sort of help us with, you know, working through those processes? So probably I'd say, like everyone in this office, we were part of one of the first CAL matters in Australia. I think everyone puts their hand up and say, yes, I was part of that as well. But what we found through that process of historically, we would push that through that kind of machine learning technology, but it didn't give us the adaptiveness that we needed for those initial investigations. And that's really key. What we found using something like Reveal that gave us that flexibility. I had probably about 12 months ago, a phone call where we had our data analytics team, risk advisory, and myself, we joined a call, and his explanation was, oh, if you need someone that just has some basic machine learning stuff, that uses some tools, that's the e-discovery team. But if you want to have something more complex, that's when you come to us and the data scientists, and there was a bit of an ego off in that process. But it was probably true for the tools that we were using, in that they were very linear. And what this actually gives us the ability to is to build multiple models and multiple inputs, is to layer that with sentiment analysis, look at the frequency of the communications. So it gave us that adaptability to do that, but then work with either that's risk advisory team or the practice group with the discovery team, and we're working side by side with them, sort of working through the tool and how we would help go through that investigation process. So that gave us that flexibility, which we didn't really have before. The other one is the cost effectiveness. And we try to use a lot of the existing machine learning technologies for these types of reviews. And ultimately, it was really still quite costly. It involved a lot of human review. But what this gave us the ability is actually to work directly with the client or with a senior associate to actually sit down, the subject matter expert really, sit down, go through the data points and go on the journey with them and say, okay, what are the key triggers? Here's some sample information, and then let that tease itself out. So there's a lot more flexibility. So it gave us that ability to kind of take us on the journey. The other one is that it provided the insights early. So we didn't have to go through and have a sample review, find out who was available. We could actually then just have this high level insight of what data is available, what it's telling us. I remember it was Friday night and we just pulled in the one of the custodians' data, and the partner wanted to know who was talking to who and what they were talking about. Took a quick screenshot of the two types of communication and looked at this really strong line that said there was significant pressure from custodian A to custodian B during that conversation. And I think we processed the data on the Friday and were able to send out that information on Friday night. And then you just took a quick screenshot of that, sent it to the client, say, hey, we're making progress. And that's that kind of early insights that have been really powerful. We didn't have to wait until a review progresses on. So what we kind of, broadly speaking, sort of bringing Reveal in for us is that a lot of employment matters, the bad actor, particularly a lot of those employment matters where they don't want to spend a lot of money, they suspect something might be up, but we don't want to go through a high costly review. It's a really cost-effective way to just process a small set of data, pull it in, have that high-level view, and then quickly report back to the practice group. Other one is competition and cartel matters, finding who's talking to who, but really what they're talking about at that high level, those early insights. And then there's kind of quick fact-finding ones, so helping prepare defence, helping sort of understand the facts of the matter really early on. So not necessarily the large sort of regulatory review, but just getting that information very quickly in the piece. And this is probably a graph that it's completely fictitious, as you could tell by the numbers, but it kind of, I think, demonstrates where we're coming from in the review process. That, one of the days, many years ago when we all started, it was a boardroom full of people churning through documents. We implemented things like machine learning and CAL for helping us to bubble to the top likely relevant documents, and that was the next way. And I feel like the way that we've been using this now so far is this is now no longer like a review team. This is a subject matter expert and an e-discovery expert working through the actual tool and just quickly going through that journey for the first couple of days. And it's still much more cost effective than having that sample review going forward. And plus, it's fed directly from the person who's been briefed by the client, who's had some interviews with the client, and feeding that information directly back. They love to say that they're fantastic at briefing their reviewers, but ultimately what happens in that process, things get lost in translation. So you get that information straight from the source. So touching on one of the matters that we worked on, and this one was, I'd say, super interesting because it kind of worked out unusually well, and I'll get to the unusually in a little bit. But a client got in contact with us. They suspected some unusual behaviour from one of their employees, and they knew that something was up. They didn't really quite know what was up. We decided to only grab about 6 months of their mailbox. Didn't want to grab a whole lot. This is just, once again, this is a cost-effective dip into the review. Grab 6 months of their mailbox. We put it through Reveal, and then quickly identified there was a wealth of high risk, really pressured sort of conversations this person was having. Provided those documents back to the client. And then, strangely enough, and maybe this was an error on our part that we didn't do a proper briefing, they said, we're completely aware of this. We know that this person's a bit of a dirtbag. That's what we found out straight away. It's just a lot of dirtbag related emails. And then as we teased that out a little more, we found out that actually what we're interested in is what he's doing on the side of the business. So Crystal, who's here, was the lead on this matter and put her investigative hat on again and kind of thought, well, okay, there's a wealth of sort of poor behavior from this person. But if they're running this side business, maybe they're a bit different with them. So I actually flipped it on its hat, looked for formal, non-pressuring, really friendly type of communication with this individual, and then found a whole wealth of information where he was basically selling parts of the business outside to people he was really nice to because he was running his side business. So provide those around 200 documents for that to the client, and then they were really happy. They were actually action that. Basically, I suspect the person was fired, but they were actually able to action from that. And that was basically the client and Crystal working together to find out what was going on with those documents. Not a large review, really cost-effective approach to finding out what was going on. But it also kind of emphasises that these tools are great, but you kind of need the people to run it as well and to still have that investigative nous and to find out what's going on through that process. But that was kind of something that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do with our pre-existing tools. Find out that sentiment, find out pressure, find out opportunity that was going on, and actually push and run that through. So I think that was a really good example of the tools and something we couldn't do before. The next one, I think, is what we're looking to use this for in the future is more on the data managed service model. So this is how do we use, and one thing that was really exciting for us when we started sending out review is the ability to use models for multiple reviews and multiple clients and reuse those models across, for you get the client specific privilege model or your client specific sort of cartel investigation model, because the clients will interact and communicate differently and the groups within those clients will communicate and interact differently. But you want to be able to pick up those models and reuse them. We're seeing a lot at the moment, particularly in the competition space, where there's just regular notices that get issued to our clients. And this is a really good starting point to pick up that model, reuse that from everything that we learned from previous, point it at that, and that's our starting point to go again. And for the life of us, tried using Cal and all of that to redo that, and it never really quite worked as well as we liked. It's early doors for us putting this into place, so it's kind of a watch this space. But I think in theory, we're hoping that this is going to be like the new starting point for all of our reviews kind of as they progress forward. So that's where we're kind of looking at taking this. But I think for us, a big one is kind of like that teaming up for the longevity and the journey and future development, having input into it, having like building that community of people that are feeding into it, I think is kind of the thing that we're really excited about and seeing like that future development feeding into that process. So I don't think we'll actually have any sentient sort of models. I don't think Mr. Musk will ever build Optimus that will do any more than a fictitious dance. But I think for us, it's the tools, and there's been a lot of promise, I think, in the past about what these tools can do. From our experience so far, I think this is kind of like the next step, and it's been proven that, look, it's going to take some work, and it still takes us to do it, which is really good because we get to keep our jobs. But it still needs that level of management to sort of point it in the right direction. But I think that what we've found is that these very, very powerful models, multi-layered models, which is more important, is the kind of thing that's going to hopefully make us add that value that eventually to the practice group and to our own clients. So thank you for hearing me talk on a Friday afternoon.
We've got a couple of minutes before we hand over to Andrew for any questions in the audience.
None from Michael Russell.
None from Michael Russell. Or here. Any like one question or two questions for Phil? I'm looking at the screen. Perfect. No, we're going to let him off? Yes. Thank you, Phil. Winner of the day, big thank you for Andrew Malarkey from Quartermenta. Thank you, Andrew.
I'll just start and say, Phil, that was a really impressive presentation. Yeah, many of the points that you made, I agree with. And I'm saying that because sort of the presentation I'm about to give is somewhat different, best described as a wander down memory lane. So if none of this makes sense, then whatever Phil said, that's what I intended to say. So I've been a partner with Quartermenta for the last 20 years. But for most of my career, I worked in insolvency, and I only moved across to forensic technology 5 years ago. So relatively new entrant. And I just wanted to sort of spend the next 10 minutes just sharing, I guess, some of my reflections or Quartermenta's reflections on, how AI has developed over those last 5 years and what we see in the future. And I did say this was going to be a wander down memory lane. So before I actually go back 5 years, I want to go back to 1985. I was a 12-year-old budding computer programmer, and I came across this program called Eliza in a computer programming magazine. And back in those days, you couldn't download it online because there was no online. The magazine didn't even come with a floppy disk or a CD. Basically, the program was just transcribed in the magazine, and you'd have to go through and spend hours copying that code across into your own computer, and then you'd spend the next 2 or 3 hours trying to hunt down all of those syntax errors and mistypes to get it working. But I got it working, and at that time I was blown away. So Eliza was actually originally developed in the 1960s by MIT, and it's actually not really an example of AI, but you might regard it as one of the very first conversational bots. And I'm not sure if you can sort of read the conversation there, but the idea is that the user can interact with a therapist, and the conversation is, the Eliza asks, "Is something troubling you?" The user responds, "The weather. Tell me more about that. The weather's awful. Please go on. That's it. Does talking about this bother you? It is. Tell me more about that." So not the most riveting conversation, but nonetheless, I was amazed by this, and I'm going to come back to this at the end of my talk. But so going back just 5 years when I first sort of was exposed to e-discovery, I guess the AI development at that time was tar, or what we now call tar 1.0, and clearly there was a need, given sort of the explosion in data volumes, the increasing costs of the review process. There was a prime need for some technological answer to, or at least part answer to that problem. And I think we can look back now and say that that tar has fulfilled a really significant role. That's not to say that it wasn't without its issues in terms of persuading clients that this was a tool that they could reliably use, and I do remember dealing with that sort of level of skepticism, or just clients not understanding what this was. And so I think we all probably went through a process of trying to sort of educate clients as to what this new technology was, and then sort of persuading them to trial this process so they could see the results from themselves. And I got this image here of it's a complex machine, and I kind of imagine when we first spoke with our clients about technology assisted review, this is perhaps an image that came into their mind. It's very complicated. Having looked at this image more closely, I think this complex machine is steam powered, and so to the extent that our clients were imagining technology assisted review was steam powered, then something was getting lost in the translation. But nonetheless, I think this was their original response. But I think as a whole, we did a really good job, and I'm talking about Australia, to actually embed technology assisted review in our standard workflows. And I know at Quarter now, on pretty much all of our engagements, we will use a TAR process. It's no longer why should we use this, it's why shouldn't we. But I think it's worth just sort of stepping back and recognizing that, because when you look at overseas jurisdictions, I think there's been there's somewhat a different story. I was recently working with an Australian regulator to help them sort of improve their technological approach to e-discovery and evidence management. And as part of that process, I was able to interview a number of overseas regulators to effectively benchmark my client against overseas regulators. And I was really surprised at how many of those overseas regulators were still using a really basic approach. I mean, literally just, keyword searching, and hadn't even thought about implementing technology assisted review. So I think we'll lose sight of that. And so I think it's worth remembering and being thankful for the fact that I think Australia is relatively receptive to new technologies, and I think it's our job to continue to leverage that, to push that forward, and frankly to take advantage of it. After TAR 1.0, TAR 2.0 came along. There were it's better for many reasons. I mean, not least just in terms of managing the projects, not having to deal with the various rounds. It was just an easier process from our perspective. I think continuous active learning also enabled us to win over those last remaining clients who were struggling to agree to implement technology assisted review. We still had clients who were insisting on a human linear review, and what we would do is we basically run a cal process in the background. We wouldn't even sort of necessarily tell them that we were doing that, and the documents that we were batching up were actually just the prioritized review documents that were being generated by the cal process. And then at some point during the review, they would either sort of make the point that, geez, we don't have a lot of relevant documents anymore, or we'd step in and sort of say, look, we've been running this process in the background and we pretty much think you should stop now. Some clients continued for a little while, but not a single client insisted on going through the entire documents. And perhaps more importantly, the next time we met that client, they were championing the use of cal. So that was important from that perspective. But I think it did come with some issues, and I think this is just my personal feelings. Is I think there was an attempt to sort of simplify what TAR was, and I think there was perhaps an oversimplification, and I think we ended up going from a complex machine to a black box. There was a red button that you could press, and the TAR would do its job. The problem was we didn't really know what was going on. And we felt, as advisors to our clients, we needed to, but we didn't really have enough information. So we, at Quarter we basically looked under the hood and extracted data that was available from the algorithm, but just wasn't available in the user interface. We used APIs to extract that data, process and analyze it in sort of Power BI and Tableau to get more insight in what was going on. So rather than just kind of following that bouncing ball, we could sort of predict where that ball was going to land, or at least understood why it landed where it was. And one practical benefit of that was we could monitor, which documents the algorithm was particularly relying upon, the ones that it felt were the most useful in its learnings. And then we could feed those documents back to our client and say, this probably needs a second review, maybe even a third review. So I think, and this is certainly not my quote, but I think, when we're dealing with clients, we need to make things as simple as possible, but there is a risk of oversimplification. I'm happy to say that Reveal's implementation of TAR allows us to get that information and get comfort, so we no longer have to rely on that sort of, using Tableau and Power BI to do that. Around about the same time, we started looking at sentiment analysis, which has been mentioned today. Back then, it wasn't available from any of the e-discovery platforms, but we were aware that Azure, AWS, IBM Watson had engines that were publicly available. We built basically an API connector to connect our e-discovery platform to IBM Watson. So it would send our documents to IBM Watson, and we'd get additional metadata back in relation to sentiment and emotions. And our hypothesis at the time, it was a pretty simple hypothesis, was our clients are probably interested in, or maybe interested in, communications where there's extremes of sentiment. That's very happy, very sad, very tense. And we did have some early successes. There was a particular engagement with a superannuation fund who was actually an investigation in relation to potential financial misconduct. There was a sort of a betting ring going on in the finance department. We ran the usual analytics, and we weren't able. Nothing was being uncovered. So we ran the sentiment analysis over the data, and it didn't uncover anything in relation to misconduct, but what it did identify was a toxic work environment, and values that were not consistent with the values of our client. To the point where a number of those custodians, we understand, were let go. So that was interesting. It told us something. It wasn't what we were looking for, but it told us something that was interesting. So that was good that we had that success. But what we realized was that effectively sentiment analysis, it's a tool which has its use. Like a hammer is useful if you're hammering a nail, but it's not so useful when you're dealing with a screw. So we had one tool that we could use in a small amount of circumstances. But what you really need is a broad tool set. So we didn't want to be the hammer looking for the nail. And what we see, I think we've seen a glimpse of it today from Enzo's presentation, but what we see in Reveal is there is a very varied analytical tool set there. Sentiment analysis is a part of that, but there's a whole raft of analytics. And from our early experience with sentiment analysis, our view is that you need that varied toolkit, because you're not quite, every engagement is different, and it's going to require a different tools. And it's our job to have, use our experience and expertise to try and understand which tools are right for a particular job. The final thing I want to talk about is, and this is the one that I'm most excited about, are the transferable data models. I did a Google image search of transferable data models, and nothing came back, surprisingly. So this image needs to do. I think this is a really interesting and exciting development. And we've been trialing this sort of internally at KordaMentha. Our insolvency area is still obviously a substantial part of KordaMentha, and they're a major client for forensic technology. I myself was an insolvency practitioner in a previous life, so I was aware that on every engagement that every formal insolvency they run, there's a statutory requirement to undertake an insolvency review. And it's a very specific review that's looking to identify very particular insolvency related issues, preference payments, unavoidable transactions. It's very niche. And previously it was basically we relied upon the experience of our insolvency practitioners to go through the documents to try and identify those. We thought this was a really good use case for transferable models, and over the last 6 months we've been working with our insolvency colleagues to actually use their IP to train a model that we can then redeploy on subsequent insolvency engagements. And the real beauty of it is the more times you deploy it, the smarter it gets. So I'm not going to, it's not a silver bullet. It needs a lot of careful management. Well, again, I'm happy to report that there is a raft of parameters that we can tweak as we build that model. So we're not in black box territory. So that's something that we really appreciate. But we really do believe there are so many use cases we believe that we can use with these models. We're starting with internal insolvency, but as I say, there's a whole raft of other ideas that we want to trial. I said I'd come back to ELISA, and as I said, not a particularly riveting conversation, but think where we were back then and where we are now. We have Siri, we have Google on our phones, on the kitchen counter, on our wrists. And I've got 2 teenage boys at home, and I have a conversation with them about how their day was, and then I ask Google to add milk to my shopping list, and it's arguable which conversation is more more interesting, and Google is always, without question, the most responsive. So I think technology has come a long way. And just to sort of illustrate that point, I was listening to the radio just last week, and it was talking about the city of San Francisco is running a trial of driverless taxis. I've driven in San Francisco, and if they can get that to work there, it can work, I think, in pretty much any city. But then I began thinking, I mean, these days it's just commonplace. We talk about driverless cars, but I was trying to remember, was it 5 years ago? Was it 6, 7 years ago when this concept was completely alien? And if someone had been talking about driverless cars, you would have thought they were a crackpot. But, driverless cars are around the corner. So I think the question that I want to leave you with is, if they're just around the corner, then what's just around the corner for e-discovery? I'm not sure, but I think it's really exciting. Thank you.
Before I wrap up, we've got a couple of minutes. If any questions, again, from the audience that's out there or in the room for Andrew, sorry, before I let you go. Any questions? So you're good. Thank you very much. Thanks. I just want to spend a couple of minutes, if I can, just for those that are on VideoCon kind of around APAC. And actually, I was just somebody was messaging me around the world. We've got attendees in Europe, the UK, and even in the US. So because we want to kind of broaden this out. So a big thank you for those that have joined. I mean, today wouldn't have been possible without kind of everybody that's in the room here today for attending, and or for those that registered out via the VideoCon throughout the world. So a big thank you to those. I mean, we had 260 that registered. I was kind of tracking it. At the height, we had about 130 people that turned up, which about 50%, I mean, is excellent, right? Because we expect to send a lot of these recordings out to the rest of the people, especially for those that kind of joined in around the world. So again, on behalf of Reveal, a kind of a big thank you. And as part of that journey of Reveal, is we wouldn't be here, Enzo, myself, Brian, and the rest of the Reveal team in APAC, if it wasn't for the foundation customers and partners that came on board in the very, very early stages, from not just from a global perspective, from a from a local perspective, and we're talking about even before last year, before Enzo joined. So a big thank you to those, and for even those that have joined in the recent days or recent weeks as well and months that are part of the Reveal journey. So that's been exciting as well. Another thank you is especially to Crystal and Phil for allowing us to host it here. And for those that are on the video con, we've got drinks afterwards. So apologies, I can't share a drink with you, but I'm happy for you to buy a drink and send me the bill. So thanks to Phil and Crystal for kind of making today possible, as well as my Daisy and John in the sky, who is our global marketing team that made today possible. It's like 1:30 a.m. for Daisy and John. So for them to stay up and kind of run this event, put it together, big thank you, kind of Daisy and John on that side. And really the exciting part for me is that for those that know me, I mean, I only got into eDiscovery, 4.5 years ago, first in time, and I've kind of immersed myself over the last 4.5 years into the market, customers, etc., to understand kind of the best part about it. And I'd say the last 4.5 years have been the best, not showing my age, best 34, 35 years of kind of my career, and not just from working with everybody here and globally, but more where the technology is going. And why I joined Reveal is I really believe in where Reveal is going from a technology and an innovation perspective. So a big thank you for all of those people that have been part of my journey. So just a quick couple of slides since we last met and why this is important. And I wanted to put this up, one, for a couple of reasons. For me in this region, it's about demonstrating the brand and the momentum and what we're doing in this market and how we want to make a difference. Thus, our attendance at ILTCon in the US, Lawfest in New Zealand. We've got our first service provider in New Zealand that's come on board, first law firms that are coming on board. That's the exciting part. What we also brought down to Australia as well, a big thank you to George and ASEDS, is the ASEDS eDiscovery Leaders Live. And since kind of we last met, we've got 5 people. But for me, these aren't the people that have signed on to Reveal or part of Reveal's journey. As you can see here, there's many people here that are running other platforms. But what George and I wanted to promote in this region was eDiscovery and how people, what people are doing themselves personally in the market. So I would love to have anybody out there in the ether or here today that if they want to be part of this eDiscovery Leaders Live, even if you're running another tool set, don't know anything about Reveal, George would love to host you as part of the podcast, not from a corporation, but from a personal perspective as well. Final couple of slides if I could. Everybody hopefully would have seen free training for the month. We want to get, again, about brand recognition for us, free training out there. You would have seen the link on LinkedIn, or we'll kind of send it out to you afterwards. Anybody that wants to do all the training, certification, more importantly, it's not just training, it's certification. There's multiple levels of certifications. For those that get to 8 courses is a genius level. And I think without me kind of, I'm not sure what it is, I'm sure Daisy will share with us. You get to genius level and there's a particular prize that you can award. And I'll buy you a drink. As I said, eDiscovery Leaders Live. Anybody that wants to get involved, reach out to myself, reach out to George as well. And finally, save the date, December. Got big things planned. I'm not going to scare Daisy now of what it is. But I just said, Daisy, put in December. So we're going to do our final one of the year. For me, it's about doing this once per quarter. So with closing, I know we've gone just right on time. A big thank you again for everybody that's in the ether, kind of sharing the journey with Reveal, not just for today, but over the last couple of years and the last 6-9 months with Enzo and I and Brian. And look forward to seeing you in the next one. And a big thank you. And thank you, Ed.